called him a king, a ruler of empires, a figure of divine right, a man whose word was law. You'd imagine grand halls, noble deeds, maybe even a few glorious battles. But his real throne, oh, it wasn't gold. It wasn't ivory. His real throne was a bath filled with secrets and the souls he devoured in the dark. This isn't a story of open warfare or political intrigue, not in the way you usually hear it. No. This is about a different kind of darkness. A darkness that lurked not on the battlefield, but within the most intimate, forbidden chambers of a palace. A darkness so profound, so perverted, it will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, about morality, and about the twisted depths of human desire. This is about a monarch whose private acts were a grotesque betrayal of his public image, a stark, terrifying reminder that sometimes the true monsters don't live in the dungeons. They wear the crown. And trust me, after this, you'll never look at those gilded historical portraits the same way again. Because this isn't just about some forgotten past. It's about the shadows that still linger, the whispers of hidden depravity that can exist even in plain sight, even today. It's terrifying, it's heartbreaking, and it's real. You think you know the glittering courts of Europe? Think again. Beneath the silk and splendor, a shadow empire of depravity thrived, hidden in plain sight, presided over by a king known as the Desired. Imagine, if you will, the early 19th century in Spain. This wasn't a time of Enlightenment ideals filtering through the masses, not really. This was Spain, fiercely Catholic, deeply conservative, and steeped in tradition. Kings were seen as gods chosen, figures of absolute authority and moral rectitude. The very fabric of society demanded outward piety and unquestioning loyalty to the crown and the church. Every public appearance of the monarch, every royal ceremony, was a spectacle of virtue and unwavering devotion. Ferdinand VII himself, despite his later reputation, was initially hailed as El Decido, the Desired One, a beacon of hope after the turmoil of the Napoleonic Wars. The people literally worshipped the ground he walked on, believing he would restore Spain to its former glory and traditional values. Yet, beneath this thick veneer of public adoration and fervent religiosity, the royal court was a breeding ground for something far more sinister. Whispers, barely audible above the rustle of lavish gowns and the clinking of wine glasses, snaked through the opulent corridors of the Palacio Real. Whispers of secret lives, of forbidden desires, and of acts so utterly unthinkable they were only spoken in the darkest, most private corners by the bravest or most foolish of courtiers. This was a society where reputation was everything, where the Inquisition still held sway in the collective memory, and where scandal could not just unravel a dynasty, but ignite a revolution. The hypocrisy was a thick, suffocating fog. While Spain itself struggled with political upheaval and a deeply impoverished populace, the court pursued its own brand of hidden indulgence. Kings, queens, and nobles paraded their virtue in public, attending mass with solemn faces, while behind locked doors, desires far darker than any battlefield strategy played out. They had to maintain the illusion, because the very foundations of their absolute power rested on their perceived moral authority and divine sanction. This society was a master of suppression, of sweeping uncomfortable truths under the thickest, richest carpets. especially when those truths involved the highest echelons of power. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many times, even today, do we see public figures, leaders, or even people in our own circles, presenting one polished image to the world, while hiding a completely different, perhaps darker, reality behind closed doors? This story, it's a chilling reminder that the human heart and the human desire for absolute power and unfettered gratification can often find the most twisted ways to manifest, regardless of the era. The curtain of respectability can be incredibly thin, even for those supposedly touched by God. And it was into this world of stark, terrifying contrasts and whispered secrets that King Ferdinand VII, a man seemingly born to uphold every virtue, would begin to unravel, succumbing to impulses so depraved, they threatened to tear his carefully constructed world apart. You'd think a king with absolute power marrying princesses would find contentment. But for Ferdinand VII, his true desires lay far beyond the gilded marriage bed, in shadows no royal advisor dared to speak of. The stage was set, a nation craving a virtuous monarch, a queen expected to bear heirs, and Ferdinand VII himself, a man burdened by immense public expectation. He married 4 times throughout his reign, each union a political necessity, a dynastic duty, but for a king whose desires were distinctly unconventional, these alliances offered little personal fulfillment. His queens often suffered, neglected or bewildered by a husband whose affections simply weren't for them. Rumors, hushed and horrified, began to circulate within the most intimate circles of the court. Not of affairs with ladies-in-waiting, those were almost commonplace for monarchs, but of something far more unsettling. This was the true inciting event, not a single dramatic explosion, but the insidious, growing chasm between his public role and his private world. It's believed that Ferdinand found his peculiar form of gratification not with women, but primarily with young, often uneducated men, typically his valets or servants. He established what some accounts whisper was his cabinet of valets or Camera de los Valets, a strictly private, almost clandestine inner circle where these forbidden acts allegedly took place. These were not relationships of love or genuine connection, but acts of absolute control and indulgence, where the king's every whim was reportedly catered to, regardless of morality or societal taboo. The psychological drive here is fascinating and utterly dark. For a man constantly under the scrutiny of court and church, perhaps these private acts were his perverse form of liberation, a desperate assertion of ultimate power where no one could judge him. Or perhaps it was simply an expression of a twisted nature, cultivated in an environment where he was above all law, all morality. He wasn't just indulging a vice. He was plunging headfirst into a secret life that fed his deepest, most shadowed desires, far from the prying eyes of his pious subjects. No one truly knows me, he might have mused in those moments of depraved solitude, finding a chilling satisfaction in his hidden world. They see a king. I see a man finally liberated from their suffocating expectations, free to indulge every forbidden instinct. This was his twisted quest for freedom, and it would set the stage for a much deeper, more disturbing descent. And as these secret behaviors solidified into a perverse routine, the hidden chambers of the Palacio Real, became the crucible for a truly terrifying transformation, laying bare the depraved core of a monarch's soul. You might think a king's greatest battle is on the field, but for Ferdinand VII, the real war, the true corruption, played out in the intimate, locked chambers of his own palace as he meticulously stripped away every layer of conventional morality. The establishment of his infamous cabinet of valets, or Camera de los Valets, marked the true beginning of this horrifying metamorphosis. This wasn't a standard royal household. It was a deeply personal, almost cult-like inner circle, populated exclusively by young, often uneducated men, chosen solely for their willingness to indulge the king's every whim. These individuals became his primary companions, replacing genuine courtly life, diplomatic duties, and even the company of his successive queens. Imagine the isolation. A king who found his sole solace and gratification not in affairs of state or the love of a spouse, but in the unquestioning obedience of these few, hand-picked youths. His very body, once a symbol of divine right, became an instrument of twisted desire. The rigid protocols of court, the pious image he projected in public, all of it was shed behind closed doors. Here, he reportedly engaged in practices that were considered utterly perverted and unconventional for a monarch, especially one presiding over a devoutly Catholic nation. We are talking about desires that flouted every societal, religious, and moral norm of 19th century Europe. Accounts whisper of bizarre rituals, a hunger for absolute submission, and a complete disregard for the dignity of those around him, reducing them to mere objects of his gratification. It wasn't just about pleasure. It was about the ultimate assertion of control over human beings. His mind, already scarred by political pressures and perhaps an inherent disposition, became increasingly consumed by these dark pursuits. The same paranoia that plagued his political decisions, his distrust of liberals, his fear of revolution, now mingled with his private desires, feeding a growing need for absolute control in his personal life. He became a man utterly incapable of genuine connection, seeing others not as individuals, but as extensions of his own will, tools for his gratification. This fueled his isolation, pushing him further into his gilded cage of depravity. The more he indulged, the more he separated himself from reality, constructing a world where his twisted desires were the only laws that mattered. The cost to others was immense. His queens, though they bore him no surviving heirs, a source of much public anxiety and private shame for the king, lived lives of quiet neglect and profound unhappiness, fully aware of their husbands' other attachments, if not the full extent of their depravity. And the young men involved, they were exploited, their innocence corrupted, trapped in a bizarre, morally bankrupt world dictated by a tyrannical monarch. Their lives were twisted, their roles reduced to satisfying the perverted fantasies of a man who held their very existence in his hands. The entire court, aware of the king's unusual tendencies, was forced into a sickening complicity, maintaining a facade of normalcy while the rot spread from the very top. You might think such a deeply religious society would have outright condemned him, but the silence, the utter lack of public outcry, was perhaps the most chilling aspect of all. Power, it seems, truly can blind an entire kingdom. And as Ferdinand's twisted world grew more elaborate, more demanding, the fragile facade of royal virtue began to crack, threatening to expose the secrets that could bring an entire empire crashing down. The climax of his perversion and Spain's enduring shame was about to unfold. You thought it was just whispers. Nah, this was when the palace walls started screaming the truth, ripping open a king so twisted his soul was beyond shattered. This, folks, was the dark zenith of Ferdinand VII. So get this. Ferdinand's private chambers, right? Those secretive rooms. They became this absolute freak show, guys. We're talking about a world where the lines between master and servant, king and prey, completely dissolved. His infamous cabinet of valets wasn't just a group of loyal guys anymore. They were literally captives, young men coerced, controlled, and forced into acts of pure, unbridled perversion. Imagine the sheer, suffocating terror, the constant dread. These weren't just unconventional desires. These were explicit, dehumanizing acts that shattered innocence and twisted souls, all to satisfy the king's monstrous appetites. I mean the royal bath. That opulent, grand tub you see in paintings. It transformed into this messed-up stage for his sickest fantasies. It wasn't filled with relaxing water anymore. It was overflowing with secrets, with the unspoken screams of those exploited, with the profound, unseen grime of depravity. This wasn't indulgence. This was systematic dehumanization. He literally owned these guys' bodies and their very spirits. Every single whim, no matter how bizarre or cruel, had to be met. Now let's look at this from a few different angles. From the courtier's point of view, man, the whole vibe in that palace just changed. You could physically feel the dread. The air itself got thick with it. They knew. Oh, they absolutely knew. Every hushed glance exchanged in the hallways, every sudden, unexplained disappearance of a favored valet. It all pointed to something unspeakable festering in the king's private world. Imagine being a high-ranking minister, a general, having to walk into that, your stomach churning, never knowing what new bizarre demand, what insane, irrational order, or what grotesque scene would be born from his depraved little parties. It was sickening. They were trapped, forced into a chilling complicity. Their fear of the king's absolute power, his unpredictable rages, was so immense that they kept silent, becoming unwitting guardians of his monstrous secrets. They had to pretend, had to smile, had to nod, even as their souls screamed. This wasn't just about gossip. It was about pure, gut-wrenching survival in a court rotten from the top down. And then, from the perspective of those young valets themselves, my God, these were often humble boys, hoping for a better life in the king's service. Instead, they found themselves in a personal hell, their innocence stolen, their futures shadowed by unspeakable acts. The psychological damage they must have endured, it's just unthinkable. They were just pawns, their lives completely controlled by one man's sick desires. Their silent suffering, their forced smiles, their blank eyes in public. These were the real indicators of the horror that no one dared to speak of. It's a tragic, heartbreaking thought. Now, let's get into Ferdinand's own twisted head. This, for him, was his ultimate victory. His paranoia, always lurking, now became his green light, justifying every single cruel, degrading demand. He loved breaking taboos, absolutely reveled in it. knowing he was the divinely appointed Tsar, untouchable, totally beyond judgment. His power wasn't just about ruling a kingdom, it was about owning souls. He became pure, raw, unadulterated in the most primal, darkest parts of him were now fully unleashed, unchallenged, and dominant. He didn't just desire, he consumed. He didn't just rule, he possessed. It's genuinely chilling to think about that level of unchecked psychological decay. A man so lost in his own depravity that reality itself warped around him. The real breaking point, the true climax for Spain, wasn't a riot in the streets exclusively about his perversion, though discontent simmered. No, it was the internal implosion, the undeniable, festering wound at the very heart of the monarchy. His final marriage to Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies was meant to secure the succession, to finally produce an heir. But she was confronted with a husband whose affections were elsewhere, whose priorities lay in his secluded, depraved chamber. The national crisis of an unstable succession, coupled with the increasingly undeniable rumors about his unnatural proclivities, became an open secret among the elite, eroding what little respect some had left for El Decido. The throne, once a symbol of stability and glory, was now universally perceived as morally compromised, drenched in unseen grime, stained by the monstrous secrets it harbored. What a legacy, right? And as this tidal wave of depravity pushed him past all limits, consuming not just his soul, but the very moral fabric of his rule, the final, agonizing acts of his reign began. A terrifying slide into utter isolation and the inescapable infamy of a king who absolutely broke everything. He had reached the terrifying peak, a crown drenched in depravity. But what happens when there's nothing left to corrupt, nowhere left to hide, and only the echoes of your own twisted desires remain? After that harrowing climax, Guy's, Ferdinand VII's life, and frankly, his reign didn't exactly get better. Oh no. The true implosion began, a chilling descent into an even deeper abyss of isolation and physical decay. The man who once craved absolute control over others slowly, agonizingly, lost control over himself. His famed paranoia, always lurking, now became a suffocating blanket, cutting him off from the few remaining loyalists, even from his own family. He suspected everyone, trusted no one, and retreated further into the shadows of his palace, becoming a spectral figure haunted by the very secrets he so desperately tried to keep buried. His dependence on that perverse cabinet of valets actually intensified, believe it or not. They weren't just for pleasure now. They became his entire world, his only companions in a gilded prison. He surrounded himself with these few, indulging every whim, reinforcing his twisted sense of power, even as his kingdom outside battled for its very soul. This continued indulgence, this refusal to engage with reality, profoundly impacted his ability to rule. His decisions became more erratic, his grip on political affairs weakened, fueling the instability that already plagued Spain. He was a king in name, but a prisoner of his own dark desires, utterly detached from the suffering of his people. The irony, the tragic, brutal irony, is that in his desperate pursuit of freedom from societal norms, Ferdinand found only a more profound imprisonment. He yearned to indulge his true nature, to be unbound by the suffocating expectations of the throne. But that freedom led him to become a slave to his own appetites, his own paranoia, and ultimately to his own grotesque loneliness. He stripped away the humanity of others, and in doing so, he utterly stripped away his own. He lost all capacity for genuine love, for true connection, leaving him utterly hollowed out, despite all his power and possessions. His end, when it came in 1833, wasn't a glorious one. It was the quiet, agonizing death of a man consumed by his own inner demons. He suffered from gout and other ailments, a physical reflection of the decay within. He died largely isolated, leaving behind a legacy not of strength or virtue, but of controversy, political instability, and the chilling whispers of unspeakable acts. If he found any self-liberation, it was the grim, perverse freedom of having lived exactly as he wished. Consequences be damned, even if that meant dying utterly alone, a king haunted by the specters of his own depravity. He might have smiled, but only if a twisted thought had just occurred to him. They called it ruling. He simply called it survival, a survival at the cost of every single moral boundary. And as the final, poisoned chapter of Ferdinand VII's life closed, leaving behind a nation in turmoil and a crown forever stained, his story transcended mere history. It morphed into a chilling, timeless question, echoing through the centuries to us, right here, right now. So Ferdinand VII, the desired one, he's gone. But his story, man, it's not just some dusty old page in a history book. It's a chilling, screaming warning that echoes across centuries, directly into our lives, right here, right now. Think about it, folks. We've seen the grand facade of an absolute monarch, right? A king supposedly chosen by God, worshipped by his people. But behind those velvet curtains, in those locked, secretive chambers, was a reality so utterly vile, so fundamentally perverse, it makes your skin crawl. Ferdinand VII wasn't just a political ruler. He was a master of deception, living a double life where his deepest, darkest desires played out, often at the expense of others' dignity and innocence. His reign wasn't just about controlling a kingdom. It was about controlling the truth, suppressing the whispers, ensuring his horrifying secrets never saw the light of day. This isn't some unique, isolated case in ancient history. Oh no, this is a terrifying mirror to human nature itself. How many times, even today, do we see those in positions of immense power, whether it's political leaders, corporate titans, or even figures in our own communities, presenting one perfect, polished image to the world while hiding a completely different, maybe even monstrous, reality behind closed doors. This story screams about the dangerous allure of absolute power, how it can not only corrupt absolutely, but also become a suffocating shield for the most unspeakable acts. It's about the silent complicity, the fear that keeps good people from speaking out, and the insidious way that depravity, left unchecked, can fester and rot a system from the inside out. Ferdinand VII wasn't just a king. He was a stark, screaming testament to the fact that the most chilling monsters often don't live in folklore. They walk among us, where the finest clothes hold the highest office. And their thrones might not always be made of gold, but perhaps of lies, of secrets, of the broken spirits they leave in their wake. It challenges us to ask, what happens when society values the appearance of virtue more than actual morality? What happens when we empower individuals beyond accountability? So, I gotta ask you, Who's truly more terrifying? The one with the unspeakable secrets, or the society that allows that power to cover them up for far too long? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below right now. Seriously, I want to hear your take on this. And if this deep dive into history's most twisted corners has gripped your soul, hit that like button, share this dark tale with anyone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe for more haunting dark history stories you won't find in your textbooks. You do not want to miss what we uncover next.